Do you have nuts made out of bone or nuts made out of brass? Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars and you're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I hope you'll find this video to be entertaining and educational, and maybe by the end of the video, I might have earned your subscription. What I'm going to be talking about today is guitar nuts, what they're made out of, and what you should consider when deciding on what type of material to use to make your guitar nut. Now, there's a lot of different types of materials out there that we can use in some different styles. And I don't have samples of everything, but I'll try to show you everything that I do use and try to fill in some of the information about some of the other materials and different types. But I may miss a couple here and there, so for the keyboard warriors out there, don't chime in and start telling me what I forgot or what I failed to consider. Most of what I'm going to talk about is what's commonly available to most people building guitars. But what I'm also hoping is that you, the viewer, will share your thoughts on the subject down in the comments section below. Tell me what you like to use when building guitars or what you prefer as a player. So let's start out by talking about the different kinds of materials that are available for making nuts. Easily the most common materials are bone, graphite, and brass. And I've got a chunk of bone here, a slab of brass stock that I use to make nuts, and a piece of graphite that I use for making graphite nuts. There's also horn, antler, corian. I've heard people talk about experimenting with other materials like aluminum and titanium and all these other exotic materials. So the question is, which is the best material to use in your specific situation? Well, obviously, I can't answer that without knowing specifically what you're trying to accomplish with your guitar build or with your playing style. But what I can do is give you some information, stuff that I've learned over the years making guitar nuts from all different types of materials. And from there you can decide maybe which is the best or what you should look out for. My favorite is bone. Bone is plentiful, it's affordable, it's very hard, it's very dense, and it's easy to work with. You can cut it, sand it, shape it, and slot it with relative ease. However, like anything that produces dust, I highly recommend that you wear a mask, especially with bone and antler, and work in a well-ventilated area because the dust that it produces can be harmful. Now, when we talk about dust that is harmful in the process of building guitars, I think it's important to remember most of the people who would suffer ill effects are people who are exposed to it on a daily basis all week long, month after month. If you're just doing it occasionally, wear a good mask, work in a well-ventilated area, and you'll be fine. But that being said, I really do like bone. It's so easy to work with. And what I typically will do is I will purchase a cow femur from my local pet store. They've already been cleaned, they've already been bleached, and all I have to do is process them. And I'll typically cut them into chunks like this size here on my bandsaw. This is about 3 inches long, about 1 inch tall, and about 3/8 of an inch thick. And out of this one piece, I can get between 4 and 6 nuts that I can use. And that's a real nice advantage because, as any guitar builder will tell you, when you first start making nuts, you're probably going to blow the first couple of nuts that you try to make. You'll either make the slots too deep or you'll sand off too much material and it won't fit correctly. So having a bunch of blanks available makes it a lot easier. And you can almost look at it as a learning opportunity. Each nut that you make is going to make you more experienced and skilled at the process. Now, another material that I like to use is graphite. The difference is really between bone and graphite is the fact that graphite is slippery. So it has all the hardness and density that you would expect from the best quality bone material. However, it has the added feature of being really slippery. Because of that, the strings can move back and forth in the slot, and that can be really important to folks who play with a lot of string bending or vibrato, aka tremolo. Having the strings sliding easily in and out of the slots just makes them last that much longer. It also improves tuning stability, and it makes the bending and the vibrato effects sound proper. If the strings hang up in the slot, it's not going to sound right. So by having a material that's really slippery like graphite makes that a lot easier. The only disadvantage though is that it's quite a bit more expensive. So it's not as easy to acquire a whole bunch of blanks and have those ready in case you make a mistake when cutting one. It can be an expensive mistake, whereas the bone is less expensive. Another popular material that folks use is brass. Brass also makes a very good nut. It's by far the hardest and most dense material that you can use for a guitar nut. The only disadvantage though is it can be difficult to slot. You can slot it with nut slotting files, but you be prepared to wear out those files even with just one nut. So that can be one of the disadvantages. I typically stay away from brass, but it does work for a nut if you want to go that route. Now another material that's popular is horn and antler. And this works basically the same way as bone nuts. It has a good hardness and density, and it's easy to slot, shape, sand, and all that. The only disadvantage is, however, is it can be inconsistent. I've had buffalo horn or deer antler, elk antler, that can be really hard and dense and work great for nuts, but then other times I've had examples that are just not usable. They just don't have the hardness and density, and it's because it's a natural product. It really comes down to the animal that wore the horn in the first place. It's basically how the animal was raised, the environment it was in, its diet, that sort of thing. Whether it was infected with diseases and so on. That can all affect the quality of the material. So I would recommend purchasing this from a source where you can actually hold it in your hand and get a feel for its hardness and durability. If you purchase it online, it's kind of a hit and miss. Now another thing to consider is there are some different styles of nuts that you can use on your guitars. You can use locking nuts, which are typically only used when using a locking vibrato, aka tremolo system. You can also use roller nuts, and those are nuts which have tiny little rollers that will kind of do the same thing that the graphite nut does, only it does it with rollers. The disadvantage with that is your slot depth is pretty much preset. So what you end up having to do is cut the slot that the nut's going to fit into a precise depth in order to achieve the action that you want over your frets. And you have to make sure that the radius of that nut is going to match the radius of your frets. So there's a few other little things to consider there. Not necessarily a bad choice. It can actually be a really good choice if you plan out everything carefully from the very beginning and pick the right roller nut to fit your guitar. Another type of nut which has always been out there but not necessarily as commonly used is the compensated nut. And this is really one of those products that the folks who use them are the folks who are hyper focused on absolute precision intonation of their guitars. Now this isn't something that's necessarily important to everybody. If we get into the ballpark with intonation, most people are okay with that. But a compensated nut will help you to get your guitar more precisely intonated. But a lot of folks will argue once you press the string down to the first fret, whether or not the nut is compensated isn't really going to matter. It's only with the open strings that an advantage. So that's something to consider. Now, one thing I don't want you to do as you consider the different styles and materials that you can use for a guitar nut is to get too obsessed with that choice, because the guitar nut is a very changeable component. If you take the plunge and make a nut out of brass and decide you don't like the way that sounds, because brass will lend a very distinctive sound to your guitar. It tends to be very bright. If you decide you don't like that, you can just swap it out and replace it with a bone nut. It's that easy. There's a little bit of an expense involved, but it's not so severe. It's not like changing out pickups or the bridge or replacing all the frets. It's a pretty simple, easy to execute change. But I think it's good to have some idea of how these different materials perform. That way you can decide whether or not you want to invest in the tools necessary to make a brass nut, or keep it simple and just use bone or graphite or horn. And then of course there are other materials, like I said, that you can use, and you can try experimenting with them. But really what you want to do before you even purchase any material is to invest in a good set of nut slotting files. That's really the basic tools that you need to make your own nut. And once you have those, you're pretty much free to experiment on any kind of material you want and see how it's going to work. And if you like it, great. If you don't, you can always swap it for something different. So I hope you found this video to be useful and educational. Maybe it'll give you some food for thought when you're considering what you're going to be equipping your guitar with as you build it, or as a player, what you would decide to use as a guitar nut. And if you've got some thoughts about this subject, please post them down in the comment section below. Share your knowledge and your experience with everybody else. And that's what helps us all to learn a little bit more and make the right decisions when it comes to building our guitars. And as always, until the next episode, take care, stay safe, click the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, again, welcome. And I would encourage you to hit that subscribe button so that you can keep watching videos that I post up on the subject of guitar building. And we'll see you soon.